After the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War, the United States enters a period called the Red Scare. The Red Scare is a time period in the 1950s, just like that in the 1920s, where we were very afraid of communists here in the United States. We had discovered many communist spies within our borders, and then it was even made worse when the USSR gets their own atomic bomb, which is going to again level the playing field. We are so afraid of communists that we are going to pass something called the loyalty boards, which require government employees to swear an oath of loyalty to the United States and our democratic style of government. This, however, was questioned on whether or not it was constitutional, and if a citizen of the United States should have to swear an oath of loyalty to their own government or a style of government. An entire committee called the House Un-American Activities Committee, also known as HUAC, was going to be responsible for questioning many Americans. One of these groups of Americans questioned were called the Hollywood 10. This was a group of writers, actors, movie producers who were all supposedly associated with the Communist Party. After their questioning, they were all blacklisted, meaning they were kept from getting work within their industry. Fear of communism is going to continue. The Red Scare continues even more and intensifies when a State Department official was accused of spying for the communist government. Although he was never actually convicted for spying for the communist, this is going to raise a lot of questions about our own government employees. The Rosenbergs, however, who are pictured here on the right, were accused of passing our atomic secrets to the Soviets. They were put on trial, found guilty, and eventually executed for their crimes. People in the United States were so afraid of communists within our borders that we are going to allow a senator named Joseph McCarthy to begin what we will later call a witch hunt. He uses outlandish methods to begin accusing many Americans of being communist or assisting communists in the United States. In 1954, he even goes after the U.S. Army. However, this set of Army hearings is going to be televised. Since they were televised, many Americans could finally see just how corrupt and difficult these proceedings were and showed that there was really no real evidence to be found within the witch hunts. When you look at Harry Truman is going to be known for the saying, the buck stops here, meaning that the responsibility for any of his policy matters was not going to be passed to anyone else, that he would accept full responsibility. He is known for using the atomic bomb to end World War II. He was also known for extending the Marshall Plan and Truman Doctrine, which was going to give aid to those countries in order to prevent communism. He was also known for our entrance into the Korean War. After our involvement in World War II and then later in the Korean War, millions of our troops are demobilized. That means they were no longer needed for active service in our military. But now the problem was that they had to be readjusted to civilian life. In order to help these soldiers adjust, we are going to pass something called the GI Bill. This was going to provide an education, a college education, for these soldiers, as well as low-cost loans so they could afford both education and housing. We will see the number of college graduates increase dramatically during this time period. Many of these people need a new place to live, so we will begin to see the building of suburbs, like we often think of outside of major cities. These are going to be these cookie-cutter style of houses that were often called Levitt towns, named after the brothers who initially began building these very large subdivisions. Most of the new homes during this time period were built in these Levitt towns or suburbs. During this period, many Americans had excess money. So because of this, we have a large demand for goods, consumer products in the United States. The first issue that Harry Truman must deal with was our economy after both World War II and Korea. The problem was that after all of the production from both of those wars and that production halts, our economy is going to enter a recession. We also had many issues with our labor unions as well as the industry owners. There was an attempt with the Taft-Hartley Act, which was going to restrict the power of those labor unions. Harry Truman is the first president to really take a very firm stand on civil rights. In 1948, using an executive order, Harry Truman is going to integrate the military. He also pushes Congress for civil rights legislation. However, they do refuse, and he winds up making members of his own party angry, since many of them were Southerners. In 1948, the election was between Harry Truman, which was a Democrat, Thomas Dewey, the Republican, and Strom Thurmond, who represented the Dixiecrats. Dixiecrats were mostly Southern Democrats who simply disagreed with Harry Truman over his civil rights legislation. Many of these Southern Democrats did not want to see desegregation begin in the South. Truman was the underdog, and he is going to go directly to Congress and he is going to use their inaction against them. And to most people's surprise, he does win that election in a major upset. You see in the picture here, this Chicago Daily Tribune even predicted that Thomas Dewey would win that election of 1948. That is Harry Truman you see there holding up that paper after his win in that election. Harry Truman's domestic policy was called the Fair Deal. It was very similar to the New Deal. In fact, it was an extension of the New Deal, meaning it's going to include programs that were very similar to FDR's New Deal. While Congress did support some of these programs, they ignored many others. You see here from the ones listed, many of these that were not approved during this administration will be approved later. When you look at Harry Truman, his domestic legacy included that he was a big supporter of the civil rights movement. He did begin the desegregation policies that are going to take place later in the 50s and on into the 60s and 70s, and he began that desegregation when he integrated the military. His economic and political policy included trying to extend the New Deal somewhat successfully. But what we've already talked about is that many of those policies would not become a reality until the 1960s with Johnson's Great Society.